population that, well, we've gone through all types of governments, including coup d'etats, union government, one party rule, and so on. So maybe all of which have failed us, has failed to deliver development, it has failed to deliver the jobs, and so on. So at last, we have arrived with multi-party democracy, and all the assurances were given. We had the backing of development partners in Europe and elsewhere. But as we progressed, we seem to have assumed that with the establishment of constitutions and regular elections, we have arrived in terms of democracy. We forgot that democracy is not a destination. It is, something that continues to be consciously developed and built upon. And that democracy is expected to deliver certain public goods. And so, rather than focusing on the outcomes of democracy, we went to sleep thinking that once we have the form of democracy, we're okay. We're not too bothered about how to make democracy work in such a way that it delivers the appropriate results. And so after a few decades, our sins have caught up with us, and the emerging youthful population is beginning to question whether democracy actually can deliver the goods that it promises to deliver. And that is where we are now at this stage. And so you see, and the reason why we are not making progress, as I said, is that we appear to be satisfied with the form of democracy rather than the content. It is believed that when you do elections, and maybe in a few cases there is a transition from one group to the other, you are okay. After the election, we can go to sleep and wait for the next round of elections. And so we begin developing autocrats, which I would term elected autocrats, because it was perceived that it is just coup d'etats that were not acceptable, and that any other form of elected government was acceptable, whether it was delivering or not delivering. We are okay with that. And our international institutions and development partners are quick to endorse that, oh, there is democracy. Then a worse form of erosion of democracy began creeping in imperceptibly. At least in the past, when there were coup d'etats, you could see that some event has happened, and then there is a threshold you can point at and say that Ghana has ceased to be democratic. And so everybody who hated democracy attacking the system. But now, when you have elected and they begin the very institutions that are supposed to help build democracy and to deliver the goods, it happens so imperceptibly that it is difficult for even the people to believe that democracy is eroding away. Because it is not the human beings per se who will deliver democracy outside institutions. The human beings will use the institutions to deliver democracy, because the institutions are the ones that will regulate and restrain the use and abuse of power. So once you compromise the institutions, then, and again, you have these regional and international bodies that have become the club of heads of state instead of the club of peoples. So they look on when democracy, the building blocks of democracy is being eroded, and yet they are quick to accept the election and help to inaugurate any president, whatever, however he's elected. And so they feel emboldened, and they will begin that the whole project of democracy is fast becoming a deceptive idea, a cloak under which some elected autocrat will exercise the same impunity as coup makers. So they begin thinking that no, something else must be better. But it is very dangerous for us, and I believe that the earlier we address it, the better. So the solution actually is not to ban. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Honorable Akwesieje, you are a very experienced politician. You have served many offices, I think, given the foreign ministry. So you have a very broad experience that you can use to maybe explain the situation as you see it. I asked the question about why the decline in Europe and also why the decline in Africa. If people say that things have changed that drastically, really truly, what has changed between today and 10 years ago, for instance? What is so different that is pushing populations to react in the ways that they are reacting? I mean, there are some important factors, there are some important things about livelihoods, about people not feeling hopeless about the future and all of that. But there are other things at play as well. So please, in your view, what do you think the factors are, what has changed so dramatically over the last decade that is pushing young people, not just in Africa, by the way, across the world, to react to the institutions that have, kept us at least not killing each other over the past, from the decades before?
Thank you very much, moderator. First of all, I should thank the organizers of this event, and then wish you'll be doing so quite often, so that there will be a forum whereby we can discuss things and then it will be taken. First, I want to look at the democracy that we have. To be fair, I think we should have grown into the democracy. If a woman, my own Queen Mother, Yasantua, was able to raise an army to fight the British, in early centuries, 19th centuries, then of course she did it because she was offended by certain demands of the British. It means also that we then had a democracy, the right to rule. The kings and queen mothers had the right to rule their people. That is why they were able to raise an army to fight the British. So if we had a democracy of that sense, why did we not develop that democracy that we had at that time? But then the democracy was somehow imposed on us. As my brother said, we all Russian to be democratic because there were some goodies that we had to be democratic before we are entitled to those goodies. So there was a missing point whereby we did not have the chance to develop how we were governed. On environmental issues, they had a system. Every Tuesday, you don't go here, because if you go there, you will die, and people respected it. They had, you cannot talk to a man, you cannot talk to an elder, anyhow, and people respected it. Now you have democracy, whereby the whole thing was discussed in Parliament by my good friend, Constituent Assembly, and it was put in there that even the chief, you are not allowed to participate in democracy. You are not allowed to practice politics. You are not allowed. But this man, even development within our areas, the chiefs are not entitled to develop their own areas. At first, they were solely to develop these areas, but now they cannot. Again, the democracy brought certain things which were not known to ourselves. So it means that democracy was imposed on us, and some persons wanted us to take it, adopt it, and use it. And in any democracy, if you don't build in an institutions, then of course, there's no democracy, there's no checks and balances. But in our case, the institutions were not built, but we say we are Democrats. We are in a democracy. When it comes to elections, the person who wins takes everything. He appoints everybody. You look at our constitution, there was an indemnity clause. Again, it was as if some interested groups gathered together to be able to draw our 1992 constitution for a purpose. So the president of Ghana is the most powerful human being on earth. He appoints almost everybody in this country, from Chief Justice up to an assemblyman. You know, in the local assembly, you have the president's appointees in there. You know, so how can we have a democracy if there is an exclusion of a certain people, and then we call it democracy? I also want us to look seriously. In Africa here, there was this thing called a peer review mechanism, whereby the heads of state will sit and review. They will come up and they will talk amongst themselves and see the things that perhaps I, the person to be reviewed, is doing wrong. That indeed help us to be able to have something like a bar, whereby you should not go beyond or below. So that also help us a bit, but again, it's not in existence. We don't do it anymore. The youth, our educational system was equally imposed on us.
Honorable,
so
just a minute. Just to say that we are trying to take a more global view and not necessarily just a national view. So
okay.
Just
okay. The youth globally, they have an ample time on their hands, employment situation, and at the same time, the amenities and also exclusion from the governance of that particular state. A case in question is in Tunisia, whereby the people rise up because of one person, and it became an Arab Spring. This situation is what I think it is worrying the whole globe, because the whole, not only the continent or not only in Ghana, is a global affair. Unless we are able to ensure that the youth is inclusive of what we do, what we discuss, and what we say, that obviously will help us to be able to listen to them and know their problems, so that we will be able to supply the needs to these youth who are coming. Again, I want us to look at the the systems in Europe now, it is surprising to see that it looks as if the right wing was some time from the British being out of Europe. The right wing was coming up so strongly. You have right wings in France. The whole of Europe was turning into from left to right. So that also brought the democracy under attack, because the left thinks that they have a panacea to uphold this democracy, and then the right also thinks that if you leave the market forces to be able to run the economy, it will be better for everybody. So there's a sort of mistrust in the people, and at least this also did not help the democracy that we are all looking up to. If you look at a place like South America, there's been a series of coups. In fact, the coups originated from there. 15 times you have a place like Peru or somewhere, Bolivia. 15 times coups. Why? It's because there were people who never understood the system and who were kept out, again, exclusion of the whole thing. And now, what they are having is that at least, if institutions are built to include them, then obviously they will be participating in the whole global politics, and it will help the system of democracy be run. The democracy, if you look at it, I point a country like Libya, when Gaddafi was there, and one time we were discussing this democracy, and he thought his brand of democracy was better for Africa, because the ministers are not allowed to be appointed by him, because he removed himself as he called himself a leader, not the president. So he removed himself from appointing ministers. The ministers were appointed at the local level. So the ministers are responsible not only to the leader, but also to the people, because the people can come and they remove him from office. This he thought was a good idea, and this he thought it was something that his democracy, his brand of democracy, works for his people, because at the end of the day, the people don't go hungry, the people have housing, they have almost everything. But then what happened? The democracy that he was practicing was not a democracy that the West thought it was a good democracy. So he was removed. He was removed. So democracy varies according to the people, according to the nations that practice this democracy. But the short of it is that there must be institutions to be able to cross-check, to be able to come into sort of a balancing act, so that democracy will be meaningful to the people. I'll take you also to Malaysia. Malaysia has a system whereby the kings are the heads of state. The prime minister is the head of the government. So with this, and then the Bumipitra, that is the people from the Malay people, they have the kings. So they will take charge and make sure that democracy is stabilized. So in this case, there wasn't much problem in Malaysia, as opposed to other countries where democracy, or you can come up with a dictator who would pride himself as a democrat. To me, this is the sort of thing that perhaps we have to look at each country by their own standard, by their own sort of their beliefs, to be able to put into the democracy that they are practicing. Otherwise, to adopt a democracy, a system where the people do not understand, where there is no there is no checks and balances, there are no institutions to check. In America, for instance, there are so many democracies, and the American president can do certain things but cannot do certain things. And it's a check that will promote the democracy. But where you don't have a strong institutions, checking, then obviously our democracy will be a sham.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And it's interesting that you bring up the issue of traditional rule, because that is also very complex in our context, because we live in countries now, and there are many different groups within the country, and there are sometimes differences in how traditional leadership works from one group to the other. So how do we integrate that into a governance system that will be seen as fair and equitable for all? But I'll come to that in a moment. Let me go to Madam Ejipon. And Madam, I would like you to focus on young people in particular. Just focus on young people and what is creating the sense of disillusionment that young people are feeling. In my preparations for this event, in reading around, I came across some ideas. Some said that the world has changed, social media, the impact of social media, and the fact that everybody can see everyone else, so it's easy for people to see how people compare themselves and see everybody thinks that everyone else is doing better. And so because young people were born into a time when social media was normal, this perception that they have is something that may not necessarily be real. That's one idea that I read about. Others are saying that young people are excluded from governance. That may be true by virtue of the fact that people who get elected normally have been young before but are now probably adults because of sometimes criteria that we set up for elected offices. And also the fact that really people will select who they want as a leader. So what do you think young people want? What do you think is pushing them? What do you think are the influences that are not so obvious, that we cannot immediately put a finger on, that is driving young people in Africa and in Europe as well to rise up against the systems that have been established? Some say that these people were born very recently. They don't know how the Cold War devastated the world. They don't even understand conflict, and they live in this fairly safe world, and so they don't even know, that conflict can really push people to the brink of even extinction. So please tell us what you think, or what your ideas are. Why do you think young people are so vexed in the world right now?
Okay. Thank you very much. Your question makes it look like I'm a young person, and I'm excited about that. But, well, I can say I'm young at heart because I teach young people, so maybe I'm the right person to answer the question. The way you're asking the question, it makes it look like young people across the globe are very much a part of this whole context of erosion of democracy. And I think that is not exactly so. If we look historically, I think the problem can be traced all the way to when we had the collapse of the Soviet Union and then the breakdown of the Berlin Wall, when the dominant system of government then was expected to be democracy, because everybody thought, well, I mean, once the Soviet Union has collapsed and the Berlin Wall has collapsed, then it means that the kind of governance that will be accepted across the world will be democratic governance. I actually feel that based on that principle, most of our Western democracies that were pushing the idea of democracy across the world went to sleep, thinking that once we have gotten rid of that and autocratic states are facing isolation, and so we're forced to somehow adopt democracy, it will become the predominant system of government across the world. But what we didn't see was the fact that these people were actually autocrats trying to survive in a system where they were facing isolation. They were forced, and Ghana is a very good example. If we look at our 1992 constitution and what happened, it was because we had a dictator that was facing an isolation, and so was forced to adopt democracy, multi-party system, which in actual fact, a lot of the countries that we are talking about in Africa and in Europe were really not interested in. So in a way, democracy was forced on them, but they found a way of surviving. Gradually, those countries that claimed to be democratic and were forced to practice multi-party system of governance found a very good way of eroding the very foundation of the kind of institutions that were supposed to sustain democracy. So you would find most of these countries, as is enshrined even in our own 1992 constitution, the winner-take-all mentality, whereby if you win, you are the one that govern, make the policy, and then if you lose, you go home and sit down. So gradually we found that certain groups of people felt that they were being isolated from the country, and what they were looking at in terms of democracy, in terms of the fact that we as a people are in charge of how we want our governance system to operate, wasn't happening. And it became more real to young people because of social media, where they get to interact with people and understood what democracy is supposed to do for them. Unfortunately, it wasn't happening in those areas. And so how then would they react? The only way they knew was to mobilize and try and fight against the system. I don't think young people by themselves are fighting against democracy. What young people across the globe are doing, really, if you look at all the systems where they are actually rising up against governments, is that they are rising against the kind of democracy that is being practiced by these countries, whereby it is actually an autocracy or dictatorship shaped in the form of democracy, where governments come in and try to erode the system that is supposed to sustain democratic partnership between people who are being governed and those that are governing. And that is what young people are doing. So I really don't think that young people are part of the erosion. In actual fact, they are trying to get the actual democracy that was promised to them to work. And they are reacting because they are not seeing that happening. Our governments are taking democracy to another level which they did not sign up for. So they, in effect, are just eroding the system. The courts are always working for the government in power because guess what? It is the government in power that is actually nominating those that serve at the court. And they feel that when they go to the court, they will still not get the kind of relief that they need. They see that most governments are focusing on sustaining their control on power instead of what democracy is supposed to give to young people, a system where that they feel that they are in a country which is going to move them forward, and that is what we keep seeing. So in actual fact, I really feel that if we are looking at the young people, what they are saying is that they want a system of democracy that works, that is inclusive of young people, and not a system that sustains people who are actually autocratic in nature.
Okay. Thank you very much. And just to, a small comment on your comment about the judiciary. I beg to differ.
But we are not talking just about Ghana.
Okay.
I'm talking about the global look, because even if we look at what happened on January 2021,
okay.
What was actually happening there? You know, there are people who felt that they were excluded from the system of democracy that was being practiced, or they were not happy that that system was changing a government where they feel that they were not a part of.
Okay.
I think we in Africa started laughing when we saw the United States actually simulate something like a coup d'etat, because we've been through that system, haven't we?
Yes.
So it's not talking about Ghana, it's talking about
generally
okay. What is happening across the globe.
Thank you very much. Please, we have Mr. Bombandi on the line. Mr. Bombandi, can you hear us?
I can hear you loud and clear, Chairperson. Yes, I can hear you clearly.
You've been following the discussion. And it seems from the comments from the panelists that people, well, I get the impression from all the comments that it seems the problem is democracy itself. Because that's where all the comments are driving towards. Mr. Bombandi, do you think democracy as we practice it today is problematic? Do you think it's outmoded? Do you think that we need to amend it? Do you think that we need to review what the pillars are and maybe, you know, restructure some of those things to reflect today's reality? After all, democracy is several hundreds or even thousands of years old. Maybe it's time for a review of what we call democracy. Coming to think about it, when democracy was being established, nobody thought about something called social media, and nobody imagined a Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk. So maybe it's time for a review of democracy itself. So if you can just respond to that, tell us what we need to do or what you think about this idea that maybe democracy is the problem and we need to review it.
Thank you so much, Chairperson Kathleen Adi. And let me stand on protocols, appreciate this opportunity. I really wanted to be in Accra last night and to be with you. I would want to appreciate your question in the context of the preceding interventions, and to say that democracy in itself is what we all aspire towards, not because it is a perfect model, but because it is the model that can allow all of us to build the type of systems that promotes peace and that deepens the type of values that our humanity can relate with. And so what we actually need to do is to reform the type of democracies we practice. And reforming the democracies we practice calls for a holistic view so that the nation state finds itself in our geopolitical multilateral systems with the same benchmarks, the same shared values and principles that allows governance to be satisfactory to all manner of people, women, men, and youth. And with this broad introduction, my specific comments will be this: that one, we are experiencing a broken multilateral system. And so when we are talking about democracies in our nation states, do not forget that after the Second World War, the principles enshrined in the UN Charter was to allow a global architecture in which fairness and justice will prevail, in which we would have a peace and security architecture that is inclusive of all. But we largely from Africa have been excluded and marginalized. And you begin to see that because we don't have a permanent voice in the Security Council, and because our weight in terms of geopolitical power has not been significant, the world powers were not really interested. But the biggest problem of erosion begins in the Security Council itself, where the permanent 5 members with veto powers became the key actors of the erosion of these values worldwide. And without going into those details, you see that invasions have happened with impunity, and the latest is Ukraine. But Ukraine is in the forefront now, and Europe is experiencing what Africa has been experiencing. And so when there was an invasion in Libya or elsewhere in Syria or Yemen, it did not matter so much. But now we see that it matters so much because a continent that is very significant with world powers and with France and Britain in the United Nations Security Council is bearing the brunt of what it means to be at the receiving end. And so the reforms that you are asking me to talk about begins with a reform of our global multilateral architecture. And that begins with world powers, including European powers, speaking for Africa to have a permanent representation in the Security Council and to allow those reforms to begin to speak to the universal values of democracy as we are talking about. And very quickly, I'll then move then to talk about much closer at home, the type of reforms that will be more specific as a response. And what does that look like? Nobody says that in a multi-party political competition, we should not have cooperation amongst political parties. It is the practice of the democracy that has made democracy a problem. But democracy in itself cannot be the problem. So if we look at our own country, Ghana, nobody says that our political parties cannot cooperate, but cooperation that is genuine to build consensus for the national interest and not for the interest of the political party in how it maintains power and how also we speak to the way we compete to access political power. If the competition to win political power becomes a zero-sum game, and let's be very honest, that political parties can go to the extent of bringing foreigners to train young people to be militants. And by that militancy, they can then be assured that they can protect the security of the ballot because they cannot trust the police. And to that extent, therefore, we begin to see in our political parties vigilantism. It is not the democracy that is a problem, but it's the introduction of the militarization of the democracy that has now become the problem that Dr. Kwete talked about earlier on in terms of the increase in violence in our elections. To the extent, therefore, that we even want to debate whether it is 8 people who died or 5 in the last elections in 2020. Why can't we agree that even 1 person killed is too much to bear if this is the democracy we want to practice? And so I would want to seriously advocate that we must cultivate a certain spirit of how the political competition is in itself tolerant of consensus building and political cooperation, so that we together define the rules. And once the rules are defined, we all agree to compete fairly and support the one who won. But because we are not prepared to be tolerant and fair, even when you win, you have difficulty in governing. And I think some of the panelists talked about the winner takes all, which is part of the burden that we continue to carry. And I will then conclude with the whole question about leadership. We can say whatever we want to say, but when we do not cultivate the type of leadership, and Dr. Laurentia talked about the young people, how do we get the young people to begin to understand that leadership that has a true value is the one that recognizes that I must work with the opponent, and that the opponent is as intelligent as I am, and the opponent also has views. And because the national interest is shared, whether by the majority or minority, we should together have a new culture of how inclusion means women, men, young people, political parties speak together in developing the type of priorities for a national agenda that everybody can relate with. Young people will support that. And that leadership then is sensitive about the use of resources for the benefit of all, and not only for the political class. This will be my preliminary responses to your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bandi. Please stay online. Don't go away. Lisbeth, I have to come back to you. You've heard all the comments that have been made so far, and the suggestions that internal mechanisms such as the APRM can help African countries, pull back from the brink, can make leadership more accountable, can help strengthen democracies by boldly calling out when leaders go wrong because it is among themselves, and correcting each other. It's a soft measure. I wanted to ask, is there any such measure in Europe? And if not, how are Europeans seeing the journey of pulling back from the brink? What are the ideas that are being tossed about in terms of what needs to be done to ensure that all the people feeling disgruntled and people feeling unfulfilled and pushing people to the streets, what are some of the ideas about how to resolve those issues, particularly to do in the countries where we have the uprise of the nationalists? Because where we have autocratic governments, you can say that that is an imposition. People have come into leadership and are closing all the doors and windows and gaps and spaces for other people to come close. But where you have an organic, nationalist movement coming from the people, then you can't dismiss that. There must be a reason why that is happening. Can you please tell us more?
Well, I would like to maybe start in going back to some of the other panelists and the issue around youth. First of all, we are all above a certain age up here. I can say above at least 40 and so on. And we should have had maybe some young people sitting with us. We talk about the youth, but they're not here at the front. And they're in the back of the room. So that's a reminder to all of us when we do this, that we include them in our conversations and not talk about them, but talk with them and listen to them. And I want to address the issue about youth, and I want to address the issue of political parties in our democracies. Also because, of course, the institute I represent work with trying to strengthen democracies through political parties. If we believe political parties are substantial for our democracies, political parties need to be democratic themselves. They have to start in their own backyard. And looking around the world, having traveled to many countries, there are many political parties that have not done their own homework. They are not democratic, they're not inclusive, they're not having women and youth and other groups represented properly in their management, in their leadership. So the power has already been corrupted within the political party that is supposed to govern our structures. And that's a general challenge for the whole world, including Europe as well. We have old political parties that have not reformed themselves. We have, just to take example of Denmark, we have less than 4% of the population being a member of a political party. Less than 4%. Out of those 4%, those are the ones deciding on how the lists are looking and who goes on the list for elections. So is that representative of a democracy and a broad population? It's a burning platform. And that lack of trust and engagement from youth and thinking or hoping that they can have access within the political parties is something we need to address. We need to ensure the food chain of young people wanting to and have an appetite to engage in our democracies and engage through the political parties. That is a challenge in many parts of Europe, that young people turn away. They shy away for many reasons. What I mentioned is that they see the access to power is far away, so they rather start a company or go into private sector where they can be part and have a strong voice. They do not want to sit in their constituency and wait until they get to a certain age when they then are allowed to pass through the power chains of a political party. So I think if we looked at political parties, and I firmly believe that they're important, but I think they also really have a challenge. And I have a political party member sitting next to me, so they can probably elaborate here. But if political parties were looked at, and as you talk about, if we looked at them at a peer review, and we compared them with private sector companies, they would be shut down, they would be closed, they would be bankrupt. Right? So we need a evolution, and we need democratization to start inside the political parties, and political leaders need to look inside and think about what have they done and what can they do to get the young people, to get the women, to get all groups represented in their political parties if they truly want to develop and evolve our democracies. So I'm sorry I didn't really answer your question, but I think this was so an important point to raise. And it's common for not only Europe, but for everywhere. They see the chance. Absolutely. I would say maybe just to link, in Europe, yes, we have unemployment, but not to the extent that is the challenge for Ghana and other parts in Africa. But we have young people also feeling excluded and not believing and not trusting our political system. And that's a huge challenge, that we are seeing a fragmentation of our societies. We are not able to include people and feel that they have an equal opportunity to live their lives to the extent they want. So that is certainly a common challenge. Although we have financially better conditions, we do see that young people vote out for being part of the political system.
Thank you very much. And I strongly agree with you about political parties. I mean, a lot of times we leave political parties out of discussions because we just assume that they will be there. But these are the vehicles for building governance in a democracy. Democracies exist through political parties. And so really, truly, we must put a spotlight on them to ensure that at the very minimum, they are democratic institutions, so that when they come into governance, they bring a culture of democracy that they practice in the party into governance. So maybe I'll give the two honorables an opportunity to let us know how the parties, at least in Ghana, are working towards increasing robust democracies, practice of democracy in the parties, ensuring that young people are not marginalized, ensuring that women are not marginalized, ensuring that parties remain vibrant, to carry themselves into the future, and open so that anybody at all will feel comfortable walking in and picking up a form or volunteering and saying, I want to be part of this. This is the party I believe in. I want to be a part of it. And it should not be a problem for anyone. Political parties in Ghana should not be private clubs. So please tell us how you plan to do that, or if you're doing it already. If we can start with Honorable.
Yes, thank you very much.
What is the name?
I mean,
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. In any democracy, the political parties are, if you like, the pillars by which the people will judge whether democracy is working or not. Again, in any democracy, the fear for the political parties is the people not losing confidence. People losing confidence in the system. It's one of the fears that any political party would be able to would want to ensure that it doesn't get to that level. Again, a case study, if you take Ghana for instance, in our democracy, it's like do and die affair. You go in to win. We do not prepare ourselves to take over power, to be able to govern the country. We don't. The democracy, the campaign starts the first day the president is inaugurated, then campaign starts. And we always do negative campaigning. We want you to slip, and then the other person will just take over by the way you slipped, and then you take advantage of that. We must also be able to think the funding of democracy, because my fear is that if you are not careful, the funding can go to an individual person who will then come in, take over the party, and then use it for his own purpose, which is a very dangerous thing that we need to do. So we have to sit down and see if we can fund political parties. In a democracy, you must give chance, as our constitution stipulates. It's a multi-party democracy that we are practicing, so therefore you should encourage all parties. You should also look at the representation systems, whether fringe parties can also have a representation in the system, so that the exclusion that we are all praying for does not come in. Everybody will be included, no matter how small your party is. To answer to my good friend, in terms of political, can I introduce this traditional thing that I was talking about?
Yes, please.
Yes. I wasn't looking at sort of a tribal thing.
Okay.
I was looking at a global, because chieftaincy, whether we like it or not, before the white people came over here, you had a system. And who were the custodians of this particular system that we are talking about? Is it not ourselves? It is, and it was. But how come we come in to practice democracy and then we deliberately, consciously exclude them? In the constitution, chiefs cannot practice, they cannot be politicians, which to me is, again, the more people that you exclude in the political system, you are eroding the democracy that we are all yearning for. So we have to look at that. If indeed we want the whole of Africa, for instance, it stretches from chiefs, stretches from Cote d'Ivoire has one, Senegal, Uganda, South Africa, Ghana, and even Nigeria. There is what we call it's now being headed by the former governor of Nigeria, in Kano, a very powerful person. If we include them and have what I call the second chamber system, is also lacking in Africa. Winner takes all is about you going in, getting it, and then you run the country the way you think fit. But there must be a second chamber whereby you, the president, you are accountable. You will go there to explain matters. I mean, in Ghana here, for instance, we have what you call the Council of State, but that is Council of State. It's appointed by the president again. How can we have a system whereby the person appointing, they can advise the appointee? I mean, you cannot have a good system whereby you can do these things. So we must have a second chamber composed of the chiefs. And then, of course, they will be there to check and balance what is happening to the country. And I believe also that the youth will also have confidence, because they will know that as for chiefs, they don't want anything. All they want is just a small schnapps, and they drink and that's it.
Oh my goodness.
So they cannot be. Okay. Well, I mean, it depends on where the V8 is coming from. So to me, let's have an institution that will check our political parties, and we'll be able to. Let's also think of funding political parties. Once we're able to do that, it becomes the bona fide property of all, instead of one rich person or two rich people, hijacking the political systems to their advantage.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Honorable General, could you tell us about your take on this political development evolution of political parties, and how you think that will help in securing the democracy that we think is now slipping globally.
Thank you very much. But again, let me begin by offering some brief comments about some of the presentations by the earlier speakers. I agree 100% with Mr. Bombandi when he talked about the need for the development of norms that will help to, if you like, grease our democratic system. If you have the democratic structures and you don't develop and stick to democratic norms, you cannot get it right, because an important norm like institutional forbearance, where everybody accepts that this institution has this function and these are the limits, and everybody is prepared to accept. It's a very important thing. It cannot be legislated, but we need to develop those norms and conventions, and then mutual recognition and respect for each other. I mean, we tend to assume that when you are in opposition, suddenly you are not unpatriotic, and that the moment you are elected, then some divine thing comes on you and everything you do is patriotic. I think that is something that we need to check. Again, I also accept that the traditional political parties and the way we run the democracy appears to be getting out of date, because you are dealing with youth who can, research and get knowledge about everything globally in real time. In the previous practice of democracy, I mean, it is assumed that if you want to control people's opinion, just control what they hear. And so when they begin hearing repeated lies, they come to accept the lies as truth. And so autocrats begin to think about, how do we control the traditional media? Shut this radio station, shut this television station, and then you are there, people can. But now, the social media has proved that thing wrong. So you have traditional practitioners sticking to the old ways of doing things, and the youth are emerging, and they know that. So that you see the youth in grown up as, liars and traitors and so on, and they begin to speak out. Again, my colleague, Honorable, talked about the whole funding of democratic project. You see, you cannot eat your cake and have it. You cannot certainly assume that political parties are very important building blocks of democracy, and somehow you close your mind as to how they get funded. So I have canvassed this view, whether in government or out of government, that we must have a second look at how we fund our democracy. And if we begin as a nation to develop the appropriate legislation that will govern the funding of democracy, we will then be able to hold people accountable. And when we take control over how parties are funded, how candidates are funded, then we will begin to have a democracy that will have a buy-in of the marginalized groups. Otherwise, we are approaching a situation where the democracy will be there in form, but it has, in effect, been hijacked. And people say that if we want to have an idea about what the policies of a future government look like, find out how the party will be funded into power. So the youth will see that, well, there is government, there is election, but the policies that will respond to the needs of the marginalized have been hijacked, and the policy is now responding to the needs of the financiers of political parties. Finally, let me briefly talk about this exclusion of chiefs and so on. Luckily, I was the champion of this idea to exclude our chiefs from active partisan politics, and it had very good basis. Our chieftaincy institution is not like any ordinary institution. It is culture-based, and whether you like it or not, everybody in Ghana serves one traditional authority or the other. So during the formulation of the Constitution, we saw the chieftaincy institution as something that can be protected and strengthened so that it forms a structure of peace and unity in our democracy, so that when politicians are misbehaving, you can always have a stabilizing force that will call them to order. So first, we remove this power of central government recognizing chiefs or withdrawing recognition from chiefs, because we felt that we must allow the traditional structures to, determine who becomes a chief, where and when. And then looking at our history as a country, where this recognition of chiefs was there by government, and then chiefs were allowed to participate in multi-party, elections. You have a situation where there is a serious conflict between our traditional customs and beliefs and then the modern type of government. If in my traditional area, my chief gets up to contest elections with me, when he says things, I have to respond, because we are all in the market looking for votes. But when you come to our tradition, you cannot say certain things to your chief. And then when there are problems and the chief calls all of you, you have to accept, and then there will be mediation and peace. So we thought that the, incidents of coup d'etats and other things were partly contributed to by the involvement of chiefs in politics. When a particular government comes to power, they have a set of chiefs who are recognized, and then the other chiefs are sent packing. Now, when there is another change, there will be another set of chiefs and so on. So we said that, look, let's keep our chieftaincy institution. And we have actually limited the sovereignty of parliament to the extent that our parliament cannot even legislate about chieftaincy without the clearance from the National House of Chiefs and others. So there are other ways of doing it. So the intention was to maintain it as an apolitical type of thing, so that when there is the need for mediation and other things, you have a traditional institution that will work to deal with them.
Thank you very much. We are coming very close to the end of the program. It's been very insightful so far, at least where I'm concerned. I hope all of you agree with me. You don't? Let me acknowledge some notable people here. We have Justice Abdullahi from the Law School, University of Professional Studies. We have Michael Henchard Okai, Ghana Integrity Initiative. There's Daniela Pia from the National Interest Movement, Samuel Bonsu from GIMPA, Fred Papo, Embassy of Norway, Clement Ajekwesi, National Catholic Secretariat, Joyce Nyame, Youth Bridge Foundation, Mordecai Kyombiano, All People's Congress Party, APC, Abdurrahman Zakari, All People's Congress, APC, Kofi Asante, okay, all right. Kofi Asante, Ise, University of Ghana. Cynthia Adokwe-Tego, Ise, University of Ghana. Susan Edouard-Mankwa, National Interest Movement. And of course, Her Excellency Birgit Madsen, Ambassador of Denmark Embassy. From the Denmark Embassy. Pardon me. Oh, sorry, it says Denmark here. Sorry, from the Norwegian Embassy. Okay, and the Norwegian ambassador is here as well. Thank you very much. So quickly, we are rounding up, so the responses should... I'm sorry to come back to you, Elizabeth. The reason why I asked about the nationalist movements, because it actually has implications, because nationalist movements tend to be more racist, tend to be more less inclusive, tend to target minorities, and I'm sure that a lot of people here are interested in how the steps that the countries in Europe are taking to, roll back some of the gains of the nationalist parties. So if you can talk about that very quickly.
It would be difficult to talk about it very quickly because it's a complex issue. I'm sorry to say, and I don't think I have the perfect answers either. The nationalistic agenda, just to say that it goes both from left wing and right wing. I mean, it's across the political spectrum in the race, the rise in nationalism. So there's not a simple answer to the motivation for driving this, but I would have to refer back to the issue of populism and what that encounters. That encounters that you say, we are one group and we have an enemy and we stand together and I, as the leader, will protect you. I mean, this is a very simplified way of looking at populism, but it's a part of acquiring, maintaining power and appealing to what I talked about earlier, that parts of our societies feel excluded. If you don't feel part of the majority, if you don't feel your rights are you're not being seen, you don't have the equal opportunities, you're even more inclined to listen to more extreme opinions and be inclined to that. May I, because I know time is short, I just wanted to mention one thing that we have alluded to a little bit. We talked about the democratization within political parties and how important they are for our societies. And you also mentioned the issue about financing and funding, which I think is also essential. I spoke to some young women in Nigeria recently, and they're doing a campaign on social media saying, no, I'm not too young to run for office, I'm too poor to run for office. And I think that's essential, a big challenge in many countries. I also know that that's an issue here in Ghana. So the issue about how do we democratize our elections and our access for all populations to be part of our political system. That will be the next high-level meeting or roundtable meeting, I'm sure.
Sure. Madam Ejekon, I have to come back to you. And since, you know, you are a youth representative, at least for today, I want you to speak more about the impact of social media. I know that is a topic that can take up a whole seminar on its own, because it's a very, very important topic. Not just in terms of usage, in terms of ownership, in terms of who has power, who's making decisions as to what is allowed on social media, given the influence and the impact that it has in shaping democracies now. Because social media, when abused, can unseat governments. We have seen it happen. It is rumored that part of, if we can mention Cambridge Analytica, some of their activities, you know, have unseated, you know, powerful governments and have even led to Brexit, it is rumored. So if you can tell us how you see social media, you know, impacting our development and our democracy, you know, moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I tackle that question, the question that you asked that all the political parties expertly dodged.
They dodged, yes.
Yes.
I saw that.
About talking about internal democracy by the political parties, which I think they all kind of dodged, which was a very, very important question. I think what we have realized is that it's actually, if we are talking about Ghana, it's actually the internal party politics or democracy that is going on that is really causing the erosion. Because if within the political parties themselves, they are not committed to practicing democracy, then of course the spillover would happen on the national level. So if we look at how most of the political parties, actually the two main political parties in Ghana, if we are looking at how their internal democracy is organized, it leaves much to be desired. Because if we are talking about issues to do with exclusion, where the youth feels excluded and women feel excluded, it's very much inside the two main political parties when you look at their internal democracy. Right from the polling station elections all the way to the national level, you see that systematically what happens is that they do some kind of token whereby you have a youth organizer who really doesn't organize anything, and usually is being a representative of the youth anyway, and a women's organizer whose main role is to try and get the women to support what is happening. So that becomes a problem. So I think that we should get the parties, the political parties, to actually take internal democracy and party organization more seriously, and that will sustain our democracy and will reverse the erosion. Now, coming to social media, especially, and then I'll come back to the fact that I keep saying that when we say certain things, it's as if it's the fault of the youth. And that is the youth that through social media are actually causing a problem for democracy. I think that social media has positives and negatives. Of course, it's also an avenue where the spiral of silence is also being practiced there, where people that hold divergent views are shut down because people go there and troll them and all of that. But at the same time, I think it has been a force for young people participating in democracy and in politics, where otherwise they have been silent, where they feel that they are not part of democracy. social media and new media technologies actually give them a voice when they feel that they don't have a voice. So I honestly don't think that social media by itself is a threat to democracy. What is a threat to democracy is actually the kind of leaders that we have who want to erode those kind of institutions that sustain democracy and not social media.
Thank you very much. It's a very good answer. Please, one question for Mr. Bombande, and I think we are wrapping up here. We would give the audience an opportunity to ask one or two questions as well. Mr. Bombande, can you hear us, please? Okay, so it looks like you can hear us, but we can't hear you.
I can hear you, Chair, Madam.
Okay, so we can hear you now. Mr. Bombande, I wanted you to respond to a question that I put down at the beginning of this encounter. Why should we in Africa worry about what is happening in Europe? And why should the people in Europe also worry about what is happening in Africa as far as democracy and the erosion of democracy is concerned?
Thank you so much. I think this is a very pertinent question. My response is, what is happening globally is now a contagion that can impact everywhere depending on our capacities to respond and to deal with them. And so if we allow the erosion to continue because we feel that it is not in our neighborhood, it is not in our continent, it is going to boomerang and come back to us. And that is what Europe is feeling at the moment. And let me quickly, last year, I did quite some work in the Balkans. One curious observation I made was that some of the Balkan states who are candidates to become members of the European Union are also going through deep-rooted issues of hate speech, attacks against women, ethnic conflicts, and I'm sure our audience, you've been following some of these stories in Kosovo, in Montenegro, and the European Union is not able to intervene on these matters because they are trying to encourage these countries to become part of the European Union. But in the meantime, the European Union also has benchmarks that these countries must meet if they want to join the European Union. Now, effectively, what then begins to happen is that the principle of accountability must hold everybody at the same time with the same level of seriousness. Otherwise, when you look on one side, because in some places, people are violating principles that should be non-negotiable, what then you do is you prepare the future for those same principles to be violated. And that's why my initial comment was, when we allow the powerful countries of this world in the Security Council, particularly the permanent members, to violate the international rules-based order with impunity, it does not just end there. It will come back in one way or the other to affect all of us. And one example was that after the NATO bombardment of Libya, we saw from 2012 the spread of violent extremism and terrorism across the Sahel, and we are still feeling the heat. And even countries like Ghana along the West African coast are no longer immune to terrorist attacks that are coming downwards from the Sahel. I use this to illustrate that we must go back and in genuine partnership, whether Europe or Africa, and by the way, there is an EU-Africa strategic partnership. But the partnership is limited to how the European Union can support the
So, as I mentioned before, we would, ask 1 or 2 questions from the audience. Anybody who wants to speak up, we are trying to conclude before our closing time. So if you can just raise your hands, please. Somebody should assist with a mic. And let's have a couple of questions for our panelists. You can introduce yourself when you...
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay. Thank you very much for extending democracy to the audience. Right. So I have a comment and then a question. First, I want to my name is Dr. Daniel Appiah. With the National Interest Movement. I'm also a lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School. Before maybe the questions, thank you to the Norwegian, the ambassador, for giving me scholarship and many of my colleagues at the business school scholarship to study in Norway.
Okay.
So it's made it possible for me to be here. Thank you. Right. So certainly the idea that maybe democracy is the problem is something that needs to be looked at. I think I have also heard many people say something like that. But the firm conviction of many experts is that democracy is not a problem. And as Honorable Esiedun Ketia said, it is a particular form of democracy that political parties are the only vehicles to actually fix democratic governance. That is really the problem. So we need to be able to fix that. And I'm very happy that at least within his party, they have made good efforts to try and then also reform the constitution to push us forward. So we have made some kind of, or at least there is some kind of hope that if we continue with constitutional reform, maybe we will be able to make democracy better. But at the end of the day, if we look over, we will see that even from the 1946 constitution, the parliaments that we created in Ghana, we had elected municipal chief executives in parliament. We also had chiefs elected through National House of Chiefs, that's the regional House of Chiefs or the provincial councils in parliament. By the time that we took over, that's Nkrumah took over, they had delivered a prosperous country. And there were no political parties there, but we had democracy that really was practiced. So the form of democracy needs to be looked at. One sobering statistic that I want us to maybe reflect on, take away, is if you look at the Afrobarometer surveys that CDD and others have done, you see that from the round 2, that's 2002 to 2018, there was a particular question that they asked: to what extent are public institutions treating citizens equally in the delivery of public goods and services? In Burkina Faso, from 2002 to 2018, from round 2 to round 7, the average, 63.1% of Burkinabés said the institutions are treating us unequally. In Guinea, 59% said they treat us unequally. In Mali, 67% said they treat us unequally. In Sudan, 66% said they treat us unequally. In the round 7-1, that's the 2016-2018, in Ghana, 62.5% say they treat us unequally. I don't want to talk about the findings that they actually found concerning strong support for coups. Nobody here has talked about coups, so I will ignore that. But when we go back, let's go and then look at the data very, very well. The question that Honorable Akwesi actually also, or the issue that he raised about the form and whether we've really been very serious in educating the youth about democracy. If you look at democracy, democracy is about equality of opportunities, equal liberties and all that. And I was educated in Norway. I know about at least the Scandinavian region in there. The educational system does not joke with education about equal rights, equal liberties, equal opportunities. But in Ghana, our educational system, right from the basic level to the university, we've ignored that totally. We cannot sustain democracy if we don't create the educational ideas and knowledge that will support democracy.
All right.
My question to Honorable Esedin Ketia finalist, please, what is the party's position with regards to the Constitutional Review Commission project? Thank you very much.
Yes, please. Please, the questions, very short and very tight, so we can move on quickly.
Good afternoon. And my name is Pimpon Francis from Koforidua. And actually, from the Political Science Department too, where I'm doing my field. I'm very happy here because my master's thesis moves around the sustainability of democracy in West Africa, the role of ECOWAS. So I'm very, very happy to be here. And let me be brief on it about the social media issue. As a youth, now if you even take a critical look, what is happening here is on social media. Someone can kindly check the number of people who are watching. It is very, very abysmal. But when it's Saturday evening and they are telecasting a live show about date rush or whatever, compare the kind of viewers and compare it to what is happening here. It is very, very a strong mismatch, which is so sad. Go to TikTok and see what our youth are doing there. I myself, sometimes I post educative videos. No one will like it. But when you post videos which entails nudity, that's where you see what our youth will more or less fall in love with. It's so sad. And I think we should have a way of dealing with it. And I think, Madam Moderator, NCC should also try and do something about this for us.
Thank you.
Now my questions comes in a three form. My issue is regional bodies are more reactive than being proactive. We know what's happening in Cote d'Ivoire, where Alassane Ouattara has extended his rule. They are quiet over it. We know what Museveni is doing to Bobi Wine, the main opposition leader. They are quiet over it. So it seems we normally be blind, deliberately be blind on these things, and later we come and condemn. This double standard should also cease. And also, when you take a critical look, the current coup seems to be popular. It's a question I also want to ask. If you go to Ouagadougou, it was popular. If you go to Guinea-Conakry, it was popular. People were on the street jubilating. What does it? It says it sends a signal. Why? And also, the third one goes to my foreign counterpart about foreign intervention. Even though it seems you have the Scandinavian ones here, but my issue is about foreign intervention. In 2004, we saw a man who came from UK, who more or less propagated a coup. When he was caught, we realized that he has affiliation with Margaret Thatcher in Equatorial Guinea, even though the coup was aborted. So I'm asking, the foreign interference is too high. Please allow us to rule. We are capable of managing our own affairs. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, audience, let's respect each other. We said one question, and please, no long prologue before the question. Just go straight to the question. Yes, please. Yes. Somebody has the mic.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Cynthia Adequatego, and with your permission, it's just a question and a comment. The question is, in the light of all the issues that the politicians have told us, simply, Nahu Kosam, they have the solutions. No, not you. I'm not talking to you.
She's referring to the politicians on the
Yes,
panel.
So they know themselves.
Please,
so you are not.
Quick, please.
So Nahu Kosam, they have the solutions, but they should let us know what is the way forward. And on my comments, the fact that I'm hungry doesn't mean I should take Gary with sand in it. We like the local governments, the election for MMDCs, but not on partisan basis. Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Mine is a very simple question, and I think that if you answer it, it will help all our political parties here. We know that in the Scandinavian countries, and you all have touched on that issue, but just glossed over it, women and the part we play in the democracy. We all talk about inclusiveness, but there are obviously worldwide not enough women. We always tout Rwanda because they have 67% or so of women in government and parliament, yes. But we all know their unique situation and how come it's women, and so many women in governance. What did you do? What was done by the women in the Scandinavian countries to bring in or to have so many women have an agency in their democracy? And what are our two major parties doing to have more women have a voice and be represented in your parties, in the leadership especially of your parties?
Okay, last question, please. Last question, please. Oh, excuse me, I think, no, this gentleman, no, please. Yes, it's true.
Well, thank you very much. I'll make it very simple. My name is Richard Ahiagba. My question in listening to all the presentation has to do with education. I think the first speaker talked about education. When you look at our country, the balance of our population are largely unaware of the objective of democracy, what it's supposed to do for us. And I think even our conversation here, we focused more on the electoral part of it. But democracy essentially does more than that. So what are we doing as far as the education of our citizens to understand the balance of the goal of education, of democracy, so that they are able to demand and measure the democracy we have more effectively, as opposed to a skewed measurement of it based on election as the balance of what democracy should deliver for us. Thank you.
Susan is the last one. No, excuse me, her hand is up.
Mine is a quick comment, and just to reinforce the point about the type of democracy we are practicing. The Western democracy that we are sort of practicing was given to us by developed countries where they are not thinking about hand to mouth anymore, and they are not dealing with the ills of poverty and disease. And so it made us think that democracy was equivalent to development. And we have practiced it for a while, and we have not seen the development in our lives. And that erodes confidence in the system. So that is one of the major things, that democracy does not necessarily equate to development. And we see it, and we feel it, because we are not developed. And of course, then we see the rise of China, where China is not practicing the Western type of democracy. They practice their own form of democracy, or if that's what they say, and we see their development. So I think that what we need to do right now is to look at the kind of democracy that we practice and do the enculturation of practicing a democracy that suits us as a people. Then maybe if we see the dividends of it, then we know that we are doing something. But right now, we are not feeling the dividends of democracy, and it's eroding our confidence.
Well, I am Mordecai Chambiano, General Secretary of the All People's Congress. I hope that this particular roundtable discussion would go a long way, not to just end here, but there should be a revival of democracy. As a secretary of my party, we have gone around the nation during the 2020 elections, and then we have come to realize that one of the factors that is declining our democracy is monetization of our democracy. Secondly, the winner takes it all syndrome. Now, to the panelists, how do we go on with our democracy without monetization? And I've said it somewhere before, if our elections were strictly on issue-based and good policies, All People's Congress would have won the election in 2020. But one of the lapses that we had as a political party was because it was based on money, that we didn't have those kind of funds. So how do we take out monetization and also take off the winner takes it all syndrome as it is happening in the current government?
Thank you very much. Before we go to the panelists to give us some responses, I would like to now properly acknowledge Her Excellency Ingrid Mollestad, Ambassador of Norway. So, a lot of the questions really focused on the activities of political parties and politicians. So we would ask the two politicians to very, very briefly give us the responses that you can, and then the other panelists will also give their responses. So who would like to go first, please? General. 2 minutes. Yes, monitor, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. A lot of the questions are similar. People want to know how the political parties are working to improve themselves so that they can improve the country, because that is the vehicle for democracy, amongst other things. So please, just tell us quickly.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I intentionally dodged the question about internal democracy because I felt we were not equally represented. I'm in the mainstream chief of my, I don't have the chief executive of the other party here. And so I thought that it would be unfair to concentrate on that. But the simple answer to that is that we don't have a problem of internal democracy at all in NDC. We started as a party which took over from a revolutionary system. So the first 10 years or so was like almost lack of internal democracy in the party. But there was a threshold in Koforidua where I got elected as the president. So that one, I think that everybody in Ghana can attest to the fact that when you talk about internal democracy of a political party, NDC doesn't have a co-equal in this country. And the representation of youth and women, our structures are also unique because we have a separate women's wing and a separate youth wing where they conduct autonomous elections right from the constituencies to the national level where we have, Congress, National Youth Congress, and all that. Finally, the issue about unequal opportunity and so on, and monetization and all that, you cannot solve the problem without talking about our democracy, political party, and our, elections, finance. Don't deal with that. You cannot, of winner takes all. Somebody finances expects that they will get some returns. And so that influences how projects are awarded and all that. And so, but when you talk about the need at political parties and the financing of candidates for elections, everybody thinks that is, individual business, so we shouldn't look at that one. And so when people get financed with wrong monies, they will implement that will satisfy their payment states. And so we have to look at that one, and it will help us to even check corruption in our system.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Honorable.
I wish you repeat because there are so many of them.
Yes, but I think we honed in on the internal political reforms.
Okay, okay. I'll take the candidate for PPP. Yes. The issue of women. I am also totally opposed the way Ghana is handling women participation in politics, because here again, General Mosquito, they did the Constituent Assembly. They put in that President may appoint this board, including one woman. That's one of the bases that we should go back and look at it and then remove that. President appoint people, not at least 9. One of them should be a woman. That's one thing. Again, in our political democracy, you tend to see that women will vie for the women position. Scarcely do you find people vying for a chairman of a police station or a chairman of a constituency. You can count few. So which means that there's something wrong basically with the whole system, how we appoint women into our body politic. So I think we need to do something very well there. Again, on the revision, somebody mentioned revision of the Constitution. I think I tend to agree with him, because the Constitution is getting older. At that time, the Constitution was promulgated. How many Ghanaians were? We had about 30-something million Ghanaians, and there are so many things that we need to go back to look at the Constitution and change it so that it will reflect the situation that Ghana is in now. On the issue of nobody will like corruption. Corruption is the biggest enemy in terms of our democracy. If corruption persists, people lose interest in the governance system, and then it could be anything. It could be the army that will take over. It could be but we know that the army cannot. I must emphasize that army coup d'etat cannot solve our problems. Rather, they come to increase our problems for us. So to me, let's look at the Constitution, and there are certain things that we think is not helping the development of women into the system. But again, I'm also against positive discrimination. That is no good, because there are so many women who are good. If you do positive, it means that you have to bring them in whether they are good or not. To me, I don't think so.
I was actually going to take him up on that.
Well, it's a bit
2 minutes.
to me. I don't subscribe to it.
Can I
Please.
quickly add? Okay, so I always believe that, and especially with the question that Madam Presidential Candidate mentioned, Yagu is my senior from school. I think that from what the General is saying, I still feel as if the political parties, especially the two main political parties, still practice some kind of tokenism and not an actual system where they actually want to include women, because you cannot have equality without equity. Here is the case that within our political system, we have a system that actually works against women wanting to participate in politics, whereby we are talking about monetarization. A woman would definitely think about spending money on her family instead of on politics. So if you monetize the system, you will get fewer women participating. The second is violence within politics. When women feel that they will be threatened, and we see that happening all the time, even with the NPP polling station election, you see the eruption of violence. Who would want to be there? A woman would definitely not want to be there, and that becomes a system of making sure that women do not participate. So we need to work on those things. I do not believe that political parties should set a different unit for women as if they are a special breed, and a different unit for the youth. I think if we are looking at the population of Ghana, there should be an equitable distribution of who represents the country. Women are more. That is what our 2019 census told us. We are more than the men. Why then do we have more men making the rules that govern all of us? We should have more women. We should be more representative. So let's create the atmosphere whereby women will feel safe and included to participate in politics. And we will see more women. It's not that we don't want to participate. We really do. But we want the environment that will encourage us to do so. Thank you.
Any other panelists would like to respond? There was a question, would you take it, about interference in governance?
Well, thank you for all the comments. I think that is so positive that we have all that interaction and reaction, and that's at least a hope for a democratic conversation to be continued across this room and in many other places. So again, super important. I will try to respond to the different comments and questions that were put out. To the lady in red, I agree, you cannot export democracy. It has to grow from the society they're in and in its own way. However, I want to say a little bit about the statistics when we look at it with the researchers. The Varieties of Democracy, the institute in Sweden, which is leading when it comes to measuring democracies. It is clear that democracies are more stable, provides better conditions. People simply live longer in democracies, and democracies do not go to war, in a simple term. So there are many good options, but I agree too that it has to grow out and be developed for each of the country and the conditions in that country. When it comes to women in our democracies and in the political parties, the Scandinavian countries have been in a long journey as well and had many fights and are still fighting to have women equally represented in public office. In Denmark, we have 37% of women in parliament. It's good, but it's not super high, and we're still struggling. We touched upon the food chain of young people not so interested to go into politics for many reasons, the social media, the harassment that has been mentioned, which happens, by the way, for both men and women that are being harassed. Different kinds of it, physically or online and so on. But it's been a long, long struggle, and we can thank our four sisters for doing a lot of hard work. And just to tell to you and all the other women here, you need to keep on your work, and the men as well, because it's not a question of putting women at the table, as we say. We are there, but it's the men some of the men having to leave the table, so there's room enough for all of us. And that's a different issue. And we had our good panelist, unfortunately he got cut off, but he works in the field that I'm also involved in. I'm sitting in the Norwegian network for women mediators, where also our good panelist there is a mediator. And one of the parts that we see when women get involved in peace processes, they're more sustainable. The pieces last longer. So they're purely evidence that it makes sense to have equal representation. So all the arguments are there. And we need to stop putting women into wings and groups and sides. We need the men to be the change agents and to invite and leave the room and leave space for women. And that's why I'm appealing to the men in the room here, because I think the women have done a lot and are still doing a lot, but they need to be to give space. Yeah, and I, maybe just to add on this, if we look at diversity as such, in companies, research has been done, the companies who addresses diversity, who invites diversity among their staff, are doing much better. So it's simply an issue about profit. So if you take away the ideology, if you're for or against, there's simply good business in having a diversity also in the political parties. So hopefully that will prevail. I agree with the other political leader there that the two main challenges, the electoral system and the monetization. And I think it's come across all my conversations here the past days with IDEC, with CDD, and with other good organizations. That are the two main issues. So we need to appeal to the political parties at power to address and take these issues. And maybe on the last part of women representation, I also met with the coalitions of affirmative action. And these mainly women and some men, they have worked for over 10 years. There is a bill, but it seems to be constantly losing its way. So there is actually very well developed legislation there. I mean, if you work with the bill for more than 10 years, I think it should be quite sharp. So it's there. So it's a question of political will also to get things moving.
The bill in Parliament. Yes. Yes, they don't want to pass it.
No, there are constitutional issues.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We are bringing this to a conclusion now. Kojo, would you like to give some closing remarks, since that was your...
Yes, I've learned a lot. Actually, it's been very, very informative, I think my first thought is that you cannot entrust democracy to non-democrats, and so the parties have a very big role. But I also take Dr. Appiah's point that we cannot organize this political system just around the parties, because from all the discussions we've had, there are things that there are themes or expectations that people have about stability, about inclusion, about welfare, about rights. And all these ends are not, it doesn't matter what regime, that political regime that you have. If you're an authoritarian and it's not inclusive, you don't provide space for improving people's welfare, at some point that autocratic state is not going to survive. And I think it's the same for democracies. And that's why there are three areas that I think we have to look at, and all the panelists and comments from the audience seems to point to this area. It's about building institutions. So what institutions do we build within democracies that is self-sustaining for democracies? Sorry. Yes, building NCC, because NCC will reinforce and sustain the democracy if it's fit for purpose and it does the work that it needs to do. And also, what kind of democratic culture that we have to build, because that democratic culture has to permeate the political culture. There's no way in which the kind of culture that we find in political party organization and building and so on cannot foster a democratic state. It's just, if a party chairman keeps the register for, elections in his house, there's no way you are going to find a better system when you come into government. So that it has to be fostered, as I say, along the value chain, and then building some values, which Dr. Bobande talked about. And I think in that context, for me, the issues we talked about here, campaign financing, democracy has to also be from the bottom. So what we do with local government reforms is critical, and we have been at it for many years, but we have not cracked it. It's getting even worse in terms of its efficiency, effectiveness, relevance to the people on the ground. Yesterday when we were at CDD and we're talking, I would say, well, at least democracy, is challenged in Europe, but if people can still get, their daily bread, maybe they are not going to be up in arms, trying to completely bring the house down. Ours is different. Our failure to reform, to self-correct, basically threatens the entire house and foundation. And that is why as I said, we have to be seized with a sense of urgency. So I just hope that this conversation, well, I wouldn't say it's a conversation starter, because the conversation has been going on, but it's the action. And we have to begin to put some of these ideas into practice. Fortunately, the campaign financing reform, at least on the CDD side, we've now have a roadmap. General Mosquito has been, part of that process, and some of the political actors Bridget, our presidential candidate, has been at the forefront to make sure, we get some. So we have some things that I think, some blueprints that we have to implement. So I hope that, we begin to put some of these things, 30 years of the Fourth Republican, Constitution, we have to really begin to look critically at democratizing our democracy. All right. A quick announcement. The GIMPA is organizing a workshop seminar on political party financing on May 19, 2020. So it's not 2020, 2022. So I think the rector is here and wanted everybody to know. But it ties in all of these conversations. We need to get some action in the medium term, even before the next 2024 election, if we really are going to not make the situation worse, but to try to address our problems. Thank you very much for coming, and we hope, as I said, the conversation continues.
Yes.
And let me thank all of the panelists,
Yes.
our moderator,
Indeed,
and our audience.
I want to say that the panel has been really fantastic, very informative, and very passionate, I must say as well. And I'm grateful to all of you for making time to be here. I know that some of you had to go away, yet you stayed. And we hope that next time when we call on you, you will still be available to us for these conversations and other interventions that we may need to collaborate on. So thank you very much. Thank you, media. Thank you, audience. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Next time when we call you, please do attend.
Ladies and gentlemen, we ask you to please kindly take your seats. Our program is about to begin.